in the US, we currently have around 10,000 chemicals in our food compared to Europe, which only has around 400. I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken.
Hey everyone, happy Wednesday. I always feel so weird starting out because you always start out. So when I do, it like completely just, I don't know why that's so weird for me, but here we go. I'm starting for Wednesday. Okay, Tara, a lot has happened since you've been traveling, and I want to like text you every day, but I'm like, I'm not going to bother her while she's, enjoying life right now. So I'll try to get you up to speed on all this stuff going on. So, some really big news that I've just been seeing all over social media, the news, everything comes from Friday night. So, on Friday night, President Trump quietly signed an executive order invoking the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. And this allowed suspected gang members in the country illegally to be deported without a hearing. And so the media ends up finding out about it. And immediately the ACLU files a court order to stop the deportations. So Judge James Boasberg signs the order
Mhm.
on Saturday saying the planes need to return immediately. But by the time he signed it, the planes were already in the air outside of the US border, headed to that famous El Salvador maximum security prison. And keep in mind, we're talking about horrendous criminals that are a part of gangs like MS-13 and Tren de Aragua. And these far left groups like the ACLU are trying to keep them here, like going completely out of their way to keep the criminals here in the United States. And so Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said, quote, a single judge in a single city cannot direct the movements of an aircraft carrier full of foreign alien terrorists who were physically expelled from the U.S. soil. And then you have border czar Tom Homan, who weighed in on this, saying, I don't care what judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming. Which I love. Like, they're not taking any of this shit, but I feel like this is just another instance of some judge trying to interfere in the president's agenda, and it's really pissing me off.
Yeah, this one is going to be interesting. And first, apologies if my audio is shitty and if you hear planes in the background because I'm at a hotel airport and it's pretty loud on my end. So I don't know if you're hearing it, Stephanie, but
I don't hear it.
sorry, guys. But yeah, this judge on Monday, I guess he ordered DOJ attorneys back to court to explain why the order was ignored. And Deputy Associate Attorney General Abhishek Cambly, I probably said that wrong. He refused to give the judge any specifics and just said it was a matter of national security and that the government hadn't violated the judge's orders. And so, of course, now the whole constitutional crisis narrative is going around again with the left. And this is, as usual, Trump cracks me up because he's now calling for Judge Boasberg to be impeached. And I don't know if you saw his Truth Social post, but I'm
Mm-mm.
going to read it. And it is filled with, all the capitalized sentences. But it says, the this radical left lunatic of a judge, a troublemaker and agitator, who was sadly appointed by Barack Hussein Obama, was not elected president. He didn't win the popular vote by a lot. He didn't win all seven swing states. He didn't win 2,750 to 525 counties. And then in all caps, he didn't win anything. I won for many reasons in an overwhelming mandate, but fighting illegal immigration may have been the number one reason for this historic victory. I'm just doing what the voters wanted me to do. This judge, like many of the crooked judges I am forced to appear before, should be impeached. We don't want vicious, violent, and demented range murderers in our country. Make America great again. So
I just love his posts.
I know. So do
Great.
I. And I want to point out something I read in the New York Post about this judge too, because I guess this is the same guy who showed leniency to the former FBI lawyer, remember Kevin Kleinsmith? He pled guilty for forging an email that was used as evidence to surveil Trump's 2016 campaign official Carter Page. And
Oh
this judge
no.
gave him probation and like community service instead of jail time. And I have to play this clip from CNN. This is an interview that John Berman did with Rep. Tim Burchett. I think it was today or yesterday. And it's a long clip, but it kind of spirals out of control, and it's all about this whole thing.
With us now is Congressman Tim Burchett, a Republican from Tennessee. He's a member of the Foreign Affairs and Oversight Committee. Congressman, always great to see you. What's your understanding of what Article 3 of the Constitution says about a judge's responsibility in federal law?
Well, it's a district judge. Of course, it's an Obama appointee, apparently, in I believe the District of Columbia. And I think it's very fuzzy at best. I think Trump's administration is correct in that this guy has no standing. It's just political posturing, in my opinion. You've got murderers, rapists, child predators, child traffickers that are here in this country illegally. They're here illegally. They're not American citizens. And we finally have a president that understands that. We had 14 million of these of folks coming in illegally that our systems are stretched to the limits to manage. And finally, somebody's doing something about it. And then you have a judge step in and say, no, in fact, the president does not have that ability. So I stand with President Trump. I think it's a complete overreach by this judge. And he's an activist. He showed up at court cases in the past at things. So I just don't go ahead.
The argument right now isn't over whether or not these people should be in the country. The argument is over whether it is lawful to remove them under the Alien Enemies Act. And I'll just read you from Article 3 of the Constitution. Yeah. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in inferior courts, as Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. Inferior courts are district courts. You yourself acknowledge this as a district court judge. And then Section 2 of Article 3 says the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made or which shall be made under their authority. The Constitution states pretty clearly that federal judges interpret federal law. Do you have a gripe with that?
No, except for this judge is a created situation, and I don't think it's viable. I think it's political overreach by the left. And that's why I don't think that's why you're not seeing a lot of members of Congress on the left that are trying to stand up and say something.
Do you have evidence that he was unlawfully confirmed by the Senate?
No, what I have evidence of is that the people that that the president deported are criminals. And I never understand why CNN takes the side of a bunch of murderers that have come into our country illegally. And I realize you have to make your stand, but that is complete nonsense, and the American public's not buying it. Listen, this is an act of war by these countries. These people have come in, they've come across our border illegally. What would happen if 14 million people swarmed the border at one time, yet it was spread out over 4 years? 14 million people. What you consider that an unlawful invasion? It's an act of war. These folks are not playing fair. They're emptying their criminals on us. And it is an act of war.
Congressman, the media didn't write the Constitution. The founding fathers did. And all I'm asking is whether you think, Tom Homan, I'll put this up on the screen, said we're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. All I'm asking you, and you are an elected member of Congress, and we certainly respect that role, what your ability to follow rulings from the federal judiciary.
I think President Trump has the ability and authority to protect this country from unlawful entry and from criminals conducting criminal activity. And I believe that he acted appropriately and Tom Homan acted appropriately. And that's why I believe overwhelmingly in this country, people support that. And they think this judge has overstepped his bounds.
Well, but so no matter what a judge
and he's
says,
taking the side of a bunch of criminals.
He hasn't taken any side yet. Congressman, he hasn't taken any side yet. All he's done is put a stay on the White House action here so that he can review their use of their novel use, frankly, of the Alien Enemies
Come on, these guys, listen. These guys, the difference between God and these judges is God knows he's not one of these judges. They're arrogant. They practice this type of thing all the time. And if you had a conservative one doing it, you all would be raising total hell.
Again, Congressman,
this you all take that side.
This isn't a question about the media. This isn't a question about the media. No one's taking a side here. Congressman,
yes,
no one's taking a side here.
He is not.
It goes on for another 5 minutes of them just talking over each other. It's crazy.
Someone needs to remind this news anchor that he is a news anchor. Okay, nobody voted him in. Nobody gives a shit what CNN news anchors think. Should be no reason he's talking over Tim Burchett, number one. But you know what? I feel like I say this every episode. Keep letting him do it. Let the ACLU go wild and these federal judges and CNN, because the vast majority of Americans voted against having these illegals in our country. So the more they try to bring criminals back in and have our taxpayers pay for hearings, the more they're going to keep losing. I mean, their party is in so much trouble right now, and they keep running with this far left narrative that the American people don't want. They don't want criminals here. But let them do it, let them do it. It's setting up the next election already. It's just like, it pisses me off, the arrogance of these freaking news anchors.
I know.
So, okay, another thing that's coming back up again is COVID-19 and where it originated from. And the reason is because now there's new evidence from the UK that emerged proving that in early 2020, they found out and they knew that COVID-19 did in fact come from a lab. And what's new about this evidence is that it's proof that the US, UK, Chinese, and German governments all knew this. So I want to play a clip from journalist Michael Schellenberger. He went on the Morning Wire to explain exactly what's happening.
MI6, which is the UK's version of the CIA. And it was sent with a very well-known and respected professor from London School of Economics in early 2020 that essentially debunked this Nature article called Proximal Origin, which claimed to have debunked that the virus came from a lab. We had done earlier reporting on this way back in 2023, showing that there was higher ups, to use the language of the key authors, Christian Anderson, who had basically changed the direction that they were going in their research. And so we already knew that this proximal origin paper was manipulated. Well, now we have this British memo, again, from the former head of MI6, saying that the Chinese government is engaged in an information and influence operation to deflect responsibility. The memo says, beyond a reasonable doubt, the Wuhan Institute of Virology retro-engineered a bat virus in January 2020. We surmise that this was done to align with COVID-19 to sustain the natural causation narrative. So, the implications of this conspiracy, I think it's the correct word in this case, right, are pretty significant, because it would suggest that you now have the US, UK, Chinese, and German governments who all knew that the virus escaped from the lab, arguably as early as January. And we former head of MI6,
okay,
which is the...
So now that the Trump administration is in there, and there's solid evidence of this. He said it came from a memo from basically the UK's version of the CIA. Will there finally be accountability? Well, here's the other piece that's happening at the same time. Trump said that he's voiding the pardons that were signed by AutoPen during the Biden administration. So that's out in the open now that AutoPen was used. And so he's telling reporters that if these pardons were signed by AutoPen, then how does he know that Biden was even aware of what was being done? So he's saying he's going to void them, and that includes the pardons for the January 6th committee, which is like Liz Cheney, Adam Schiff, and Anthony fucking Fauci. So will there be accountability with Fauci?
I fucking hope so. And again, I still don't understand how you can pardon someone when they have not yet been accused of a crime. That still goes over my head. But this is one of the things that I really hope the Trump administration is going to focus on, the accountability for all of the lies and the damage that was done by this false COVID narrative. And it's not just Fauci, it's every single one of the government agencies, the spokespeople, the media. Everyone who knowingly lied to the public about COVID needs to be held accountable.
And I think they may actually. I mean, we'll see. I don't want to be too optimistic and then be let down, but like you said, how can you give someone a pardon that hasn't committed a crime that is, out in the open at the time of the pardon? That, but now on top of that, seeing it was signed with auto pen, that's like
Right.
two big barriers they would have to overcome if they try to fight it. So it'll be interesting. But just like we talked about on, I guess it was Friday, right? The spending bill did pass like we expected. And I have to say, the reason I'm bringing it up is because I have a completely different view of the bill, thanks to a TikTok creator named Joy. She's the only person that explained this in a way that made total sense to me. So I wanted to explain it on the podcast in case there's anyone out there that was like me getting all pissed off. Like, why the hell are we pushing through Biden's spending bill? Why aren't we cutting spending? Okay. So, first of all, let's see here. By passing the bill, okay, they're going to keep all this insane funding from the Biden administration. And so the question this TikTok creator asked was, why would fiscal conservatives want to do that? And the answer is because they don't have to spend it. So they can pass the funding, but that doesn't mean they're going to spend all of that funding. And so what they would have to do is allocate the money according to what Congress approved. But using USAID as the example, if Congress allocated money to an agency like USAID, and the money goes to that agency, the agency doesn't have to spend it all. Okay. So, like at USAID alone, 83% of the contracts were cut thanks to Doge, but they're still getting all of the same funding from last year. But since they cut 83% of the contracts, what would happen then is the unspent funds for those contracts that no longer exist will go to the Treasury. And then from the Treasury, that gives them some options. They can pay down the national debt, they can send taxpayers refund checks, and they can reinvest that money into the next budget. And those were all things that Trump said he would do. And we covered this a few weeks ago when he said that 20% would be sent to taxpayers in what they're calling Doge dividends. 20% would go towards paying down the national debt, and then the remaining would be cycled into next year's budget. So this actually gives him the funds to make good on that promise, which I think is a great thing. So does that make sense? Like to me, it finally clicked why Republicans would vote yes for this.
If they actually do the spending that way, then that's going to be fantastic. But that's what remains to be seen.
Yeah.
Um, it's like I said the other day, like he almost had no choice with but to do a CR. Like there was really no other option. And so if he can take this CR and show that he's using it in a way that benefits the American people, then I'm all about it.
Yeah. Same
So
here.
we shall see. Yeah. The other thing that I wanted to bring up that literally just happened since we're recording this on Tuesday evening instead of Wednesday, Trump just got off a very lengthy 2-hour phone call with Putin. And according to both the White House and the Kremlin, it went very well. The White House put out a statement after the call and they said, quote, the leaders agree that the movement to peace will begin with an energy and infrastructure ceasefire, as well as technical negotiations on implementation of a maritime ceasefire in the Black Sea, full ceasefire, and permanent peace. And I also want to point out that before this phone call, it was once again reiterated by Ukraine that they believe Trump can bring peace. So Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha stated that Kiev is not going to be an obstacle to the peace deal with Russia. And he stated, quote, we really believe that the leadership of President with that with the leadership of President Trump, we can achieve long-lasting just peace. So, Stephanie, this seems like the first hopeful sign of a start to the end of the conflict, hopefully.
I hope so, because I am sick and tired of talking about it and want it to be done already. Yeah, I meant to say this earlier when we were talking about him deporting the illegal criminals, because the polling just came out for CNN and NBC, which, take polls with a grain of salt. But I do think it's interesting. I wanted to point it out that NBC polls showed that only 27% of people have a favorable view of the Democrat Party right now, which is the lowest in over 35 years. And then CNN wasn't much better with 29% looking favorably at Democrats. And so all of this stuff that the media keeps pushing about how Trump's so bad for this reason or that reason, I think is proving why their ratings keep getting worse and worse. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, I've got something to add to this as well because this this polling is apparently a drop of 20 points, which in 4 years is a very big deal. Like that's insane. And on the way to the hotel just now, we were listening to Megyn Kelly's podcast from yesterday, and she was talking to Glenn Greenwald. And I want to play a clip from their conversation because they were talking about some of the results of this polling.
Right. What are you going to do? And that is actually also reflected in this CNN poll because they asked, name the Democratic leader you feel best reflects the core values of the party. And this is among Democratic aligned adults. The largest recipient of votes was no one. 30%. No one. No one best reflects the core values of the Democrat Party. The next in line with just 10% was AOC, who's just about tied with Kamala Harris at 9%, Bernie Sanders at 8%. These are all bad numbers. These are clearly not the party leaders if you're only getting 9 or 10%. But interestingly, coming in at 4% is Barack Obama, who is tied with Jasmine Crockett. Yes, Jasmine Crockett, who nobody ever even heard of 6 months ago, but is out there doing her like dancing videos and trying to be like a new version of AOC. But unbelievably, Obama and Jasmine Crockett are tied for who best reflects the core values of the party, which tells us what? Well, I think if you look at the people you named, obviously other than Obama, who's there because he was the president, and Kamala, who's there because she just got done being the nominee, but 9% is pathetic, or whatever it was, 8%. The three people that you named, AOC, Bernie, and Jasmine Crockett, for all the intense disagreements I have with them, are people who, in contrast to what I just got done saying, do actually believe in things and do actually say the things that they believe in. And I think most of all, what they're doing now is creating this kind of perception, this branding, this posture, like we are going to fight Trump on everything. And on some level, what the Democratic Party wants, what Democratic Party voters want, I think this poll shows it, is not just fighting with Trump, but somebody who at least believes in things. And that was, Bernie's campaign in 2016 and 2020 stood for a clear affirmative agenda, which a lot of people disliked and a lot of people liked, but you can't deny that he did. And I think that's what this is showing. Above all else, you've had this like faceless, kind of soulless, very consultant-driven, artificial set of Democratic Party leaders who are petrified of saying the wrong word, going off script even a single time. And then you have Donald Trump just riffing every day on everything without the slightest regard for how people are going to react to the things that he's saying. And I think that is what has made the Democratic Party, which is just like this very limp, neoliberal, vaguely kind of trying to be a center-left party, but never really saying much or believing in anything. I think that's what you're seeing in these polls among Democratic Party voters is at least the people who are out there making a mockery of themselves, like Jasmine Crockett, which is why the media loves her. At least they're saying something. They don't seem super constrained. Mm-hmm. They're not.
So,
Yeah.
Obama at 4%.
Yeah. Isn't
AOC
that
has
crazy?
the highest.
Like, even they think Obama is like behind the scenes on things, but next to Jasmine Crockett, like, are you kidding me? And okay, I wish I would have gotten the clip because I was listening to a clip this morning It was a CNN clip, and they were interviewing, I forget his name, but it was a Democrat congressman from Massachusetts. And he was like trying to talk reason into the CNN anchor. And he's like, look, they were talking about the whole trans agenda in sports. And he's
Mhm.
like, what's happening with the Democratic Party is they are taking the most extreme left viewpoint that there is, and they're trying to push it onto American citizens and shame Americans into listening to them instead of taking what Americans want and implementing it in Washington. Like that's the whole point of the party is they're supposed to take what the average American wants and run with that. And instead they're just trying to shame everyone that doesn't agree with them. And clearly they've lost, pretty much every aspect of their party for that reason. And yet they're still not getting it. Like they're still running with that narrative, which I say keep letting them because like the party will dissolve at some point. I mean, how much further can you drop?
Well, that brings me to my next point because if we're talking about unfavorable views of Democrat leaders from members of their own party, we have to talk about Gavin Newsom because there is a lot of pushback apparently for his new podcast. And Stephanie, you know that this podcast is my new obsession. And it's apparently not going over well with the left. And he is being called out big time for having conservatives like Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon on the show. And his own supporters are now saying he's pandering to the right. His favorability with the left has declined from 46% to 30% since the start of the podcast. And even Republicans who are agreeing with his stance on things, like when he told Charlie Kirk how he agreed that transgender shouldn't be competing in girls' sports, the overall consensus from those who agree say that he's insincere, fake, and pandering. And I was reading an article where it said his favorability rating went from +4 to -6, which is a 10-point swing in the wrong direction, right? And only 13% of voters had an improved perception of him, and 1 in 5 voters said the podcast made them want to tune in for more. So, AP News also reported that the founder and president of an organization called She the People, which is like one of the LGBTQ organizations, her name is Amy Allison. And I guess she played a big role in helping Newsom defeat the 2021 recall attempt. But she said he's betraying California and he's showing, quote, weakness and naked ambition. She told reporters he's trying to remake himself to be an acceptable to MAGA. Democrat political leaders in California are speaking out as well. Assembly member Chris Ward and State Senator Carolyn Menjivar, I guess they lead the state's LGBTQ plus caucus, and they said they were, quote, profoundly sickened by his statement on transgender athletes. But it's like we've been saying since he started the podcast, and basically all along since we've had our podcast talking about Newsom, is he's trying to make himself look more moderate. And I just think this makes him even more dangerous and more unpredictable. But he's kind of switched gears now, and he's doing an interview with more liberals. So his recent interview was with Tim Walz, and I have not had a chance to listen to that yet, but I will obviously report on it when I do.
Well, and I mean, I'll admit, I think it's a smart move by him and really the only card he has left to play because again, he can see the writing on the wall. The Democrat Party is in bad shape. He's in bad shape in California. And I think, yeah, right now, everyone on both the right and the left can see he's full of shit. But I think he also knows what if the Democrats always done? They lie, 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 thinking that if I say it enough times, people will believe it. And after 4 years, there will probably be a lot of people that'll start to believe it and think he's turned a new page and they'll start to like him. He's got the look, he's got the charm. And I think he knows that. And worst case scenario, if it doesn't do anything for his political career, now he's got a growing podcast that people are tuning into. I mean, people on the right and the left are tuning in, and he's got some good numbers. So either way, it's a good move for him, I think.
Yeah, but you know whose podcast doesn't have good numbers apparently is Michelle Obama's new podcast. Have you heard about it?
Oh no, but it makes me cringe even just thinking that this woman has a podcast.
Yeah, I guess she started a podcast with her brother. I have not listened to it. I will not be listening to it, but Megan Kelly was talking about it and how her, like, for her first two episodes, I think she had 14,000 views, which, you know, for us would be amazing, but for Michelle Obama, she should be getting way more than that.
Oh yeah. I mean,
So,
she thinks she's the most famous person in the world, so that's got to be a big blow for her ego, but yeah, that sucks for her. Maybe if she starts interviewing people like Charlie Kirk, that'll help boost her ratings. Just saying. Okay, I want to completely switch gears again, and you're going to hear me talk about this a lot because it's like one of the biggest topics that I'm very concerned about, and that's Trump's plan to do away with the Department of Education. And this is becoming like a main talking point of the left, at least on social media, where the left and the MSM are just trying to fearmonger and say how like students are getting all of their funding taken away and they're not going to be able to eat lunch at school anymore and all kinds of nonsense. So I wanted to talk about it to arm everyone with the facts. And, you know, if anyone's dealing with someone like that, send them this episode that covers, you know, just some basic facts about the Department of Education. So it starts with a podcast clip that I saw on TikTok from the account Average Operator. And I thought it was really eye-opening, where she just lays out some interesting things to consider. So let me play that real quick.
Educate a single child in America. It does not run a single school. It does not pay a single teacher's salary. Some people are concerned about what eliminating the department might mean for students, despite the fact that their track record is terrible and it hasn't improved outcomes. You know, what about protections for, say, groups of kids with special needs, for example? I would note that the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was signed into law in 1975. It provides protections for kids with special needs. It predates the creation of the department. That goes nowhere. Spending for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDA, that would move over to HHS. So that goes nowhere. The same would likely happen with Title I spending for low-income districts. It could be managed by HHS. Data collection, send it over to Commerce. Let the Census Bureau handle it. Student loans, send it to the Small Business Administration or the Treasury Department. So there are more appropriate receiving agencies where you could keep intact some of the appropriate functions of the department, but not actually have the infrastructure that is that massive bureaucratic boondoggle that Carter created.
So I wanted to play that clip because that is what I'm hearing on social media that's just false, where people are saying, oh, they're going to cut all the special needs funding. Oh, they're going to cut all the funding for low income schools. And it's factually inaccurate. That's none of those cuts are happening. And I was trying to convey this on Friday when I looked up the budget and couldn't find anything other than the money going to these grants and contracts. It's not going to students in schools. And that's, I think, what's so eye-opening for me looking at this is that the Department of Education, it's basically has all this funding that's just going to pure bureaucrats, just like the USAID funding was going to a bunch of bureaucrats, and it opens the door for corruption and waste. And this podcast that I just played covered a bunch of stats. She was saying, for instance, when you look at education prior to the creation of the Department of Education, the education gap between the lowest income students versus the very affluent students was about 4 years worth of learning. Today, the gap is about 4 years worth of learning. It has not improved at all. And in some instances, you can make the argument that it's gotten worse. And Tara, I know in previous episodes, you went over like different stats that actually went downhill. And
Mhm.
so then they create the Department of Education, right? They increase the funding. Bill Clinton comes along and creates the No Child Left Behind Act. They increase the funding again, even more. And nothing narrowed the learning gap. Nothing between the impoverished students and affluent students. 46 years, $4.1 trillion in funding, and not a single metric has improved. We are ranked number 40 worldwide, yet we have the highest cost per student in the world. So where is all the spending going? And as I pointed out on Friday, most of it's going to these administrative costs for processing student loans. And the rest is like regulations and government bloat. And get this, okay? In an average school district, only 47.5% of staff are teachers. That is mind-boggling. Less than half of the staff in schools are teachers. But when you have to answer to the Department of Education to comply with all these regulations and red tape, you need a ton of admin staff to be able to do that. And so it's just crazy looking into it. And I think we can all agree continuing to do the same thing and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. So the only real option at this point is to do something new. And so what's being proposed when Trump says he's dismantling the Department of Education, what he wants to do is take that funding that's actually going to students with disabilities and low income schools and move it to different agencies like HHS. School lunch funding can move to be controlled by the Department of Agriculture. So it's not eliminating those things, it's moving funding around, the things that are important, and taking out the administrative bloat, and then letting the states and local governments decide how the rest of it's spent.
And that's the thing too. Like I love how you're always so passionate about the education topic. And again, because I don't have kids, I'm not dealing with it firsthand. But I totally agree with you. And like I think one of the most eye-opening things about everything that Doge is exposing is how much administrative bloat there is in every agency. Like all of this taxpayer money that's been going to administrative functions that probably one person could do the job that 20 people are getting paid for.
Yeah. Yes. And that's the thing for any teachers out there, because I know teachers get upset. I think teachers are the most selfless people, and they're only able to do what they're allowed to do, number one. But number two, I want teachers to think about this for a second. Over half of the staff in your school district is admin staff. If you get rid of that, maybe you can actually learn a living wage so that you don't have to have two or three jobs just to survive. I mean, if anyone should be upset about this, it should be teachers because they're getting the short end of the stick here. So it's just crazy. And then the other thing that is making way with schools is the whole lunch program. Okay. And Tara, Texas, the state you live in, is leading the way in the whole making schools healthy again movement. And I really hope that this is going to be the start of every state doing this. But they just passed what's called SB 25. And what this will do is restore daily PE, which was a thing when I was a kid. It removes the toxic
I was gonna
food.
say, they don't have PE anymore because they had
They
that one
have it,
in
but
school.
so they have it, but it's not every day. And then in high school, it's like an elective. Like you don't even have to do it. And if you do, it's only like one quarter, at least here in Florida. So yeah, I mean,
Wow.
that should be a daily thing, right? Removing toxic food additives from school lunches. That's what this bill's going to do. And then it's going to prioritize real nutrition education. So not learning about the food pyramid, which is absolutely backwards. They're going to teach them real education on how they should, eat and take care of their body. And so I heard that and I was like, wait a minute, what's RFK been up to? Like I've been so consumed with, you know, everything else going on. I've completely lost track of him. But it turns out he's off to a fast start, just like everyone else in the Trump administration. So on X, he most recently posted that companies will no longer get to decide if their new ingredients are grass or generally regarded as safe. His post said, quote, I am directing the FDA commissioner to start the process of changing the rules to eliminate the self-affirmed GRAS pathway for new ingredients. I'm also calling on the US FDA and NIH to continue to conduct and improve post-market assessments of GRAS chemicals currently in our food so we can rapidly identify the compounds that are making Americans so sick, and so that American consumers and regulators can make informed decisions. This is an important step in our pursuit to make America healthy again. So I heard this and immediately had flashbacks of when I worked at Coke, and we could launch a brand new product and there was no FDA approval needed. And so then when I left Coke and I went to go work for pharma, I was absolutely shocked that every single new drug cost around $20 million dollars just because that's how much it costs to go through the FDA approval process, which is so rigorous. Meanwhile, the food that's making the people sick can be created with no approval, nothing, no oversight whatsoever. But then the drugs that help treat the conditions that are caused by the toxic food have this very expensive approval process. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, that was like a red pill moment for me. And here is a fun little fact that Kennedy points out. He says in the US, we currently have around 10,000 chemicals in our food compared to Europe, which only has around 400. And some examples he gave is
Mhm.
titanium dioxide, which is linked to cancer and DNA damage. It's banned in the EU, but it's used in a ton of foods here in the United States. Potassium bromate is a known carcinogen that's banned in the EU and Japan, but here in America, it's in our children's bread. So Vani Hari, the food babe that everyone should follow her account, it is so eye-opening. But she posted, quote, the American Beverage Association is saying if states ban dyes, 60% of their store shelves would be empty, admitting that 60% of grocery store food has petroleum and coal tar-based ingredients in them, end quote. So this is just so messed up. And Kennedy calls grass, generally regarded as safe, an experiment on the American people. And it's going to stop now. And I really do. I feel like we're a bunch of guinea pigs that they've tested on. It's
Oh,
maddening.
100%. And like I've said this multiple times on the podcast, the difference I feel in my health eating foods in Europe over the last year and a half as
Mhm.
opposed to the States. I mean, that's the one thing I'm like hesitant about going back is eating shitty food again because I know this is going to take a while for,
Mhm.
all of this to take effect. But I'm
Yeah.
glad that it's starting to do something.
Well, I think what's great about this grass thing is it's not just focusing on like one thing, like red dye 40. It's focusing on all 10,000
Everything.
chemicals that up until this point companies got to just choose. Like, oh, we think it's safe. Well, yeah, you're the one that's going to be profiting off of it. Why the hell would we let them make that decision? It makes no sense. So I'm really excited. I think he's doing a lot very quickly, and over the next 4 years, maybe we could be more like Europe when it comes to food because all these food companies already make those products for Europe. So it's not like they have to go reinvent the wheel. Now, for the podcast listeners who have been with us for a really long time, they might remember when we did an episode on fluoride and I gave you my toothpaste recipe, my non-fluoride toothpaste recipe. So, another thing that RFK wants is for fluoride to be removed from the water supply. So, Utah is the first state removing it from the water. Hopefully, more will follow soon. But this led me to look at the history of why we have fluoride in our water to begin with. So in 1945, Grand Rapids, Michigan was the first place in America to add fluoride to the water supply. And over 15 years, they found a 60% reduction in tooth decay in school children in Grand Rapids. So everywhere in the country started adding fluoride to the water supply. And once again, the United States has to be guinea pigs because we're like the only place in the world. I think they said it was under 5% of the world that has fluoride in the water supply. So now, fast forward to modern day, and studies show that fluoride in high levels, like drinking it every day, causes lower IQ in children, thyroid disease, bone fractures, and nervous system damage, which is insane. And the craziest part is we don't know for certain that it actually prevents tooth decay because over that 15-year study, there were a lot of advancements in dental care. And so not only that, but did you know that fluoride is corrosive? And I just don't understand, like, how can something be so good for your teeth, but it's also corrosive? That doesn't really make a lot of sense. But here's the thing, even if fluoride does help teeth, there's plenty of options available now, like fluoride toothpaste. There's all kinds of fluoride products. In Utah, where they took it out of the fluoride, out of the water supply, they're even allowing pharmacists to give a fluoride prescription for people that feel that they need it. But we don't need to be drinking it, okay? We don't need to be ingesting it. We can put it topically on our teeth. Let's not drink it. And I think that everyone can agree that lower IQ and nervous system damage is much worse than a decayed tooth. And with all the advancements in dental care, that decayed tooth can be dealt with before it gets too bad. But here's the best part, not the best part, the worst part. And it's right on Wikipedia, okay? Right in plain sight. So fluorosilicic acid is the most commonly used additive for water fluoridation in the United States. It is an inexpensive liquid byproduct of phosphate fertilizer. Okay? We are drinking a byproduct of fertilizer. I mean, is this not like one sick freaking science experiment? I'm sorry. Like, I don't want to drink fertilizer, you know?
This whole thing, like you just while you were talking about the fluoride, I know I've mentioned this on the podcast before. The dentist that I've been seeing in the Czech Republic is a holistic dentist, and she has a twin sister. They're both dentists, and they have a podcast, and they talk. They just started this podcast like a month ago, and they talk about how like tooth care, how it affects like every part of your body, and how like when you have problems with your teeth, it's indicative of all these other issues that you might be having. And they're very much against fluoride. And I want to talk to her and see if I can get her to come on the podcast because I think she would give a very fascinating perspective on why, like from a holistic perspective, they don't use any of this stuff.
Yeah. Oh, that would be amazing if we could get her on the podcast because any
Yeah.
dentist is going to tell you, yeah, fluoride's good. Well, you can look it up. Like it is now classified as a neurotoxin. Okay.
Mhm.
Like I would much rather have my kids have tooth problems than a neurotoxin that's going to lower their IQ. And it just makes you wonder, like, did they know that back then? Was this a way to keep us compliant? And you look at like kids now and all the mental health issues and yeah, there's so many different factors, but maybe fluoride had something to do with it. If it lowers your IQ and it doesn't allow you to think critically, maybe there's more to the story here. I mean, I really do think it was one sick experiment. So, along the same lines of what's happening with, these health agencies, the NIH was also ordered to cancel more than 40 grants that explore vaccine hesitancy and ways to improve vaccine acceptance. So, Open the Books found that at least $267 million was spent by the Biden administration to combat COVID-19 vaccine misinformation and disinformation. And I mean, what a bunch of wasted freaking money. $267 million on that. And it still blows my mind. We're only 3 months into the Trump administration, and look at how much has been accomplished in rooting out wasteful programs. I mean, it never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah, Trump has done more in 3 months than the Biden admin did in 4 years.
Hmm.
I mean, he did more in 2 weeks than the Biden admin did in 4 years. And so, speaking of Trump, I want to end this on a couple of his recent Truth Social posts because nobody makes me laugh like this man. So, I guess The Atlantic asked him to do an interview, and The Atlantic is a magazine that's fairly liberal. And so he posts on Truth Social and he said, third-rate magazine, The Atlantic, that made up the suckers and losers hoax about me and the military and refused to even acknowledge the vast horde of people who emphatically denied this fake story, has asked me to do an interview. Below is my response. Ashley Parker is not capable of doing a fair and unbiased interview. She is a radical left lunatic and has been as terrible as possible for as long as I have known her. To this date, she doesn't even know I won the presidency 3 times. If you have some other reporter, let me know. But Ashley is not capable or competent enough to understand the intricacies of high-level politics. Likewise, Michael Schur has never written a fair story about me, only negative and virtually lies always. The Atlantic is doing terribly, losing a fortune, and will hopefully fold up and be gone in the not too distant future. It has absolutely no credibility and would be far better off in terms of quote journalism to cease publication. Nevertheless, when you have a writer with intelligence, competence, and fairness, please let me know.
That is awesome. He's
Oh
just
my,
like, he's
I
getting too
know.
good with these like online trolling statements.
It's just crazy to me that I've said this before, like this is the president and he communicates everything on social media.
I know.
And so the other one I want to read is about Hunter Biden. And so this, I think, was yesterday. He said Hunter Biden has had Secret Service protection for an extended period of time, all paid for by the United States taxpayer. There are as many as 18 people on this detail, which is ridiculous. He is currently vacationing in, of all places, South Africa, where the human rights of people has been strenuously questioned. Because of this, South Africa has been taken off our list of countries receiving economic and financial assistance. Please be advised that effective immediately, Hunter Biden will no longer receive Secret Service protection. Likewise, Ashley Biden, who has 13 agents, will be taken off the list.
Oh my God. I love it.
I know, it's comedy.
We hear more from him in one day than we heard from Biden in all 4 years. So
Yeah,
pretty
I know.
interesting.
I think Trump has almost been in office now for as long as like the days that Biden was at the White House.
Yeah, right. Mentally, he wasn't there, but physically,
Yeah.
he was there maybe about 3 months. Yeah, that sounds about
Yeah.
right. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, yeah, a lot going on as usual. And we'll be back here on Friday with whatever else comes up because you know there's going to be a lot. So thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you back here Friday.